move on to another issue. It still concerns Russia. President Trump met with President Putin at the G20 in Hamburg on the sidelines of that summit. They agreed on some joint cybersecurity measures. Right. But shortly afterwards, President Trump said, well, no, I don't want to go through with this deal. What happened?
Yeah, well, I think he got a lot of pushback. I mean, including pushback from the Republican Senate. I mean, I think it was Florida Senator Marco Rubio that said doing a cybersecurity deal with Russia is kind of like doing a chemical weapons deal with Assad, right? You know, a chemical weapons inspection unit with Assad. You know, he got a lot of pushback. He realized that this didn't make a whole lot of sense, particularly given, you know, what Russia did in the election campaign. And so I think he just decided this wasn't a good move.
Vladimir, what do you think happened there? Do you think there was pushback that, you know, domestic politics is basically dictating what the president can do insofar as the relationship with Russia is concerned?
Well, there is what we have to stress is there was, like, you know, immediate subject of discussion and kind of a bigger picture. So on the immediate things, they can probably agree to disagree. You know, whatever they take on cyber security, whatever they take on, you know, who grabbed, you know, this diplomatic compounds and how Russia will respond to that, that's one thing. But what's important is that at least they talked for a fair amount of time. They established certain kind of rapport, established certain kind of, you know, relationship with each other. And, you know, everybody has to be aware that the relationship between the two countries are not that good. You know, your guest talked about Americans, you know, being able to chew and understand, where Russians also understand. Russians look around and see American bases encroaching on them. They're moving around now. You know, missiles are moving to Baltic states all around Russia. They are angry. So the fact is that they are pushing. They demand Putin to answer in kind. So what we're talking about is some kind of escalation. While these two presidents talk to, at least they probably discuss also the ways to de-escalate. As you know, the Secretary of State Tillerson talked about the fact that we agree on some long-term goals. We might not agree on how to get there, but we all want peace for our children. We all want to find the ways to de-escalate in Syria, de-escalate in Ukraine. So I think these are important things. Little details, it's domestic politics. Trump has to, you know, appeal to this type of his, you know, audience and others, and let him figure it out.
Joe, the president has said that he wants a more constructive relationship with Russia, but he's being criticized for that. President Putin has been criticized inside the United States. I want you to take a listen to what a Republican Senator Lindsey Graham had to say about this meeting in Hamburg. Let's watch.
Had what I think is a disastrous meeting with President Putin. 2 hours and 15 minutes of meetings. Tillerson and Trump are ready to forgive and forget when it comes to cyber attacks on the American election of 2016.
What do you make of that?
Well, what I make of it is that I think Lindsey Graham wanted a much firmer, stronger statement coming from President Trump to Putin. Don't do it again. Stop it, or there'll be consequences to this. And I think what we all should recognize that the cyber attack on democracies is a very serious, almost warlike game. To be quite candid, it's very serious.
But it's done by both sides, isn't it?
Well, yes, I think that would be fair. And so I think what you hear a strong hawk like Lindsey Graham, if this was a hot war, you know, he'd be talking about, you know, be ready to throw missiles at him, because that's Lindsey Graham. But what he's saying is, look, I wanted to hear something strong. Now, you know, you've got the other issue. For example, now the Russians want back 2 pieces of property that, by the way, were nothing more than a nest for spies. And people criticized then President Obama because they said that was a gentle approach towards the cyber attack.
And Joe, if I may, I mean, I think the Republicans in the Senate should be given credit for standing up to President Trump on Russia. And, you know, sometimes we lump the entire Republican Party as one.
Yes,
and they really have stood up to the president on Russia. They've passed legislation that said President Trump cannot end sanctions on Russia unless they go through the United States Senate. Overwhelmingly Republican support. That shows, I think they should give some credit for that.
Michael, has the president got a problem with his own party here?
I think he's an outsider dealing with insiders, and I still think they're reconciling what I think was Trump's broad populist approach toward this versus, some really deeply entrenched approaches toward Russia, particularly that go all the way back to the Cold War. I mean, people that have been engaged in this have really been taught early on and shown repeatedly that Russia is not a country to be trusted. But the instincts of Trump to sort of say, let's see what we can to de-escalate this are so crucially important and valuable. And I think we're at a moment right now where his instincts are good. Ultimately, though, U.S. interests will not be necessarily defended through negotiation. They have to be defended through strength. Reagan was the first to say that, and I think every president learned it, either knew it or learned it the hard way. And I think Trump does realize that, particularly as it relates to cybersecurity. We're not going to negotiate a defense of cybersecurity. We should attempt to negotiate it, but ultimately we need to secure the infrastructure of the country through technical and other defenses that are going to provide for that.
And I do also want to say with your guest in Rhode Island, and he's right. The Russian people are one thing, and their government is something else. The American people are one thing, and their government is something else. And the reality is that if you got rid of the two governments, and I believed had an exchange between the two people, we'd probably see a heck of a lot more cooperation and need for reconciliation of these differences than we see when two strong-headed leaders get together who both, quite candidly, want to be the top dog.
Right. In fact, there was a survey done here in the United States by Harvard University which showed that I think something like 60%, almost 60% of Americans said, look, we've had enough of this Russian collusion story. We need to move on to important things in this country like healthcare, like climate change, etc. Although a lot of people also agreed with the appointment of a special prosecutor.
That's right, and it seems like the Senate agrees. They've extended the August recess so they can start talking about healthcare and maybe talk about the tax reform as well.
Okay, Vladimir, you wanted to say something?
Well, I think, I'm glad that, we eventually sort of seen, addressing concerns of both Russian people and American people. And I think concerns of American people are primarily with jobs and home security, security with, with economic situation and so on. And I think that's what should be addressed. And to do that, the best way to do it, from what we understand, is through trade, through some kind of, economic cooperation and things like that. And that's important to address rather than, bringing up all this, fear-mongering and, Russia did this and we have to answer in kind. There are serious issues in front of this country. Competition coming not just only from, Europe, from China, from many other places. And these things should be addressed rather than just being engaged in Cold War rhetoric, which for some reason still hold its way over Washington.
It's also one of the dangers, I believe, of politicizing Russia to the extent that we have. Maybe the compounds should be given back. Maybe a review of sanctions is warranted. Maybe a cyber agreement, would be likely would be a very constructive step forward. And yet now you're developing within the administration an inclination to second guess all these things about how they're going to be viewed politically. Well, and that's not the way that these should be assessed. They should be assessed singularly depending on their merits and the objective of strengthening of rapport. So I think it's greatly complicated. What needn't have been a very complicated relationship.
But see, William Coleman, the former Secretary of Defense and former senator from Maine, told me one thing about when he met Putin, that it was very clear to him. Putin wants to be the world power. Putin wants attention. He wants respect. And I think that's really what concerns, I know, me and a lot of my listeners, is that it is the personality of this man who wants a certain kind of respect that some people on this planet find dangerous.
And in some respects, that's part of his domestic political paradigm.
That's right.
In the sense that this strength is something that the Russian people understandably do want and felt that they had and lost.
But not at the expense of the United States.
Well, and it can never be done at the expense of the United States.
40 seconds left, Afshin. I want to get to something where these two countries do agree, and
Right.
that is they agreed on a ceasefire in Syria, which appears to be holding.
Right, and that's probably one area where they can work together in this ceasefire in Syria. But again, I mean, this is an example where Russia injected itself into the Syria war, really is on the wrong side of history, barrel bombing people. Immense numbers of innocent civilians are dying in collusion with Bashar al-Assad and Russia and the Iranian government. But now that has made him a player, and it's a player that inevitably we have to deal with, and this is one area where we can find some cooperation.
We have also heard from airwars.org, a very respected organization based in London, that between 2014 and the end of May this year, the United States dropped 84,000 bombs on Syria and Iraq.
Right. This is the, but one of the things that people used to say about President Obama, that he wasn't engaged in this fight. There was a lot of bombs falling.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.